You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I established the precedent that if there is an extremely notable death in the sports world, that takes precedent over the playoffs. I am going to follow that precedent by starting this show off with the death of Gale Sayers, one of the most dominant running backs in NFL history. What he did in realistically 4 full seasons, and one season where he only played 9 games, is legendary. It's fun to speculate how good the Browns could have been in the late 60s and into the 70s if Jim Brown had stayed healthy. It's also fun to speculate how great Sayers could have been. Sayers is a Hall of Famer. One of the best running backs in NFL history, but when you look at the career leaderboards, he's not there. If he could have stayed healthy, would Emmitt Smith be atop the running backs Mount Rushmore? That's how dominant Sayers was. It's kind of funny. The title of best running back went from Jim Brown right to Gale Sayers. 2 players who had their careers ended way too early by injuries. Sayers was nicknamed the Kansas Comet because he went to the University of Kansas. Now, I did not know this. Thank you, Wikipedia. He said in an interview that he did on a Chicago Cubs broadcast that he almost went to the University of Iowa. But the head coach at the time, Jerry Burns, wouldn't meet with Sayers. Let this be a lesson to all you college head coaches out there. Make time to meet with your recruits. Don't treat them like garbage. Don't take anything for granted. Especially when that recruit is Gale Sayers. So Sayers became a Jayhawk and immediately dominated. In 1962, he led the then Big 8 Conference and was 3rd in the nation with 1,125 rushing yards. The year after that, he repeated as the leading rusher in the Big 8. The year after that, he slipped a little bit, but he contributed more on special teams. He was an All-American in 63 and 64. Entering the 65 season, there was a competition for Sayers' services. The Bears had taken him in the NFL draft, 4th overall. But in the AFL draft, the Chiefs took him, 5th overall. Sayers decided to go to Chicago, and the rest is history. If he had gone to the Chiefs, he'd still be remembered as an all-time great. He would have been the best running back in AFL history. He would have been better than Matt Snell, Emerson Boozer, Cookie Gilchrist, all those guys. But I don't think he'd be remembered as fondly if he went to the AFL. He made the right decision. There's no question about that. In his rookie year, 1965, Sayers immediately showed that he belonged. He accounted for 22 touchdowns, 14 rushing, 6 receiving, 1 kickoff return, and 1 punt return. Imagine a rookie today entering the league and scoring 22 touchdowns. As a quarterback, okay, Joe Burrow's probably going to do that. But this was a running back. Like I said, incredibly dominant. On October 17th of that year, Sayers accomplished something that it took someone over 50 years to duplicate. Sayers had a rushing touchdown, a receiving touchdown, and a kickoff return touchdown in the same game. For whatever it's worth, it was against the Vikings. Now that had been done previously, but Sayers for a long time was the last player to do that. It took Tyreek Hill 51 years to do that. On December 12th of that year, he scored 6 touchdowns and helped the Bears beat the 49ers 61-20. He was responsible for 326 yards. Those performances helped him become the unanimous choice for Rookie of the Year from the AP, the UPI, and the NEA. The year after that, Sayers didn't slow down. If anything, he sped up. He led the NFL in rushing yards with 1,231. He kept up his great pass catching. He had more catches than any Bear in 66 with 34. With those catches, he got 447 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he kept up his great kick returning. His rookie year, he set the record for most all-purpose yards in a season. 2,272. Sayers destroyed that record his sophomore year by gaining 2,440 yards. He was first-team All-Pro. He made the Pro Bowl. He was MVP of the Pro Bowl. No end in sight, right? Well, for whatever reason, and obviously this has been dramatized in Brian's song. I'm not sure if any liberties were taken or not, but George Halas decided that he wanted Brian Piccolo to get a little more run. So while Sayers was still great, still first-team All-Pro, another Pro Bowl, Piccolo ate away at some of his carries. Now, not too many. Piccolo had 87, Sayers had 186. Piccolo didn't have any touchdowns. Sayers had 8, 7 rushing, 1 receiving. But Piccolo was there. He was making Sayers work. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it was something that Sayers wasn't used to and probably didn't deserve after he won the rushing title. But it did prove prophetic, as in '68, Sayers suffered the first of what would become numerous knee injuries. He tore his ACL, his MCL, and his meniscus cartilage in his right knee. He was on his way to a great season. He was actually leading the NFL in rushing yards at the time of the injury. He only had 2 touchdowns, though. Piccolo was creeping up on him. Ronnie Bull was there. Sayers was going to win the rushing title, but not the rushing touchdown title. Something that he never won. It's kind of incredible. He rushed for 14 touchdowns in a year, and that's still not enough to get past Jim Brown. Just speaks to how dominant he was. This is how dominant Sayers was. Back then, the NFL season was only 14 games. Okay? We know that. Sayers only played 9, so he missed 5 games. Sayers was still a first-team All-Pro. Think about that. You miss 5 games. You're still first-team All-Pro. That would never happen today. The year after that, Sayers had probably his most impressive season. Coming back from a devastating injury, he wins the rushing title with 1,032 yards. He has more rushes than anyone in the league. 8 touchdowns. Leads the league in rushing yards per game the last time he would ever do it. He did it 3 times. Because of that, he won Comeback Player of the Year. You may be wondering why I'm not talking about what Sayers did in the playoffs. Surely with such a great running back, the Bears had to make the playoffs, right? No. Towards the end of George Halas's tenure as head coach, and all throughout the Jim Dooley and Abe Gibron years, the Bears never made the playoffs. They went through a stretch from 1964 to 1976 where they never made the playoffs. In fact, from 1964 to 1983, they never won a playoff game. I mean, Sayers was the lone bright spot on a bunch of terrible Bears teams. The best example I can give would be someone like Herschel Walker when he was with the Cowboys. He was their lone bright spot. You can pick any NBA player you want who played for a lousy team. Anthony Davis when he was with New Orleans. Devin Booker now. Very similar to what Sayers went through in Chicago. Fantastic player, never made the playoffs. When the calendar turned over to a new decade, Sayers' career went downhill. In the 70 preseason, he had another knee injury. He had bone bruises in his left knee. He tried to play through it, but he really couldn't. He tried to come back in 71, but he was a shell of his former self. Such an ignoble end to a fantastic career. Brian Piccolo saw his career ended unfairly. Sayers had his career end unfairly. His speed was incredible. His vision was fantastic. Numerous people like Hallis, Mike Ditka, and Dick Butkus sang Sayers' praises constantly. Of course, we all know the story with Brian Piccolo. If you haven't seen Brian's song, go see it. Don't watch the remake. Watch the one with James Caan and Billy D. Williams. First interracial roommates in NFL history. Piccolo obviously getting diagnosed with cancer. Sayers sticking with him until the bitter end. He was an incredible human being. Sayers helped Piccolo cope with his cancer. Piccolo helped Sayers when he had his first really bad injury. The list of records that Sayers has or once had runs a mile long. I'll go through some of the notables. 22 touchdowns in a season. O.J. Simpson broke that in 1975. 6 touchdowns in a game. He shares that record with a bunch of people. Highest career kickoff return average for players with at least 75 attempts. 2 return touchdowns in a game. He shares that record with a bunch of people. 2,272 all-purpose yards as a rookie. It took Tim Brown 2 extra games to break that record. Single-season all-purpose yards. 2,440 in 1966. Stood for 8 years. Then Mac Herron broke it. He had 4 more yards. It still counts, but still, 4 yards. He has about 1 million Bears records. Some notable accolades. He was inducted into the College Football and Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1977. His number is retired by the Jayhawks and Bears. He was named to the NFL's 1960s All-Decade Team, was named to the NFL's 75th Anniversary All-Time Team, and the Sporting News, at the turn of the millennium, named Sayers the 22nd best player in football history. Mind you, he only played a little over 4 full seasons. He had been sick for a while. He had dementia. The NFL did a bad job with dealing with head injuries back then. He died today at the age of 77. May he rest in peace. Moving on now to Lakers Nuggets. And this was probably the craziest game of the playoffs. If you're a Lakers fan, even though you got the loss, you have to feel pretty good about your chances. You're down by 20 in the third quarter. Everyone is thinking this game's over, forget about it. We can go to bed early and get a good night's sleep for a change. But then the Lakers come storming back. They go on an 18-2 run. The deficit was cut to 3. Rajon Rondo showing up. The great steal, the active hands, whatever you want to say. He's had a very underrated series. Then in the final 5 minutes of the game, the Lakers forget how to play basketball. Again, down by 3, 5 minutes left. You have the chance to tie the game. They go cold from the LeBron layup to cut the deficit to 3 to the Kyle Kuzma layup that made it 111-101 Nuggets. The Lakers only hit 1 free throw. That was it. It was all the scoring they got. I know I'm going to incur the wrath of all the LeBron stans out there, but he did not have a good game. Now, he had a triple-double, which is saying something. That's how incredible LeBron is. Even when he plays bad, he's still great. That's the mark of a great player right there. But, look, when your team needs you, you can't go cold. You can't turn the ball over. You can't miss shots. That doesn't work for me. Next thing you know, Jamal Murray is hitting 2 3-pointers, and that's it. Game over. The Nuggets survive. This was a wild game. Good job for the Nuggets in realizing that they actually want to try to make a series out of this. But I will say it's a good harbinger that the Lakers cut the deficit to 3 when they were down by 20. The simple fact is the Nuggets allowed them back into this game. They did what the Lakers did. Game 1. Lakers up big. They only win by 12. Game 2. Lakers up by 16. It takes a last-second Anthony Davis 3 for them to win. No team that has had a big lead in this series has been able to hold it. I think what we're really seeing here is that the Lakers are just eminently better than the Nuggets. I mean, it took a Herculean effort from Jeremy Grant for the Nuggets to win this game. You could make the argument that Grant was their best player. I'm not kidding you. I would listen to that argument. What did I say? The Nuggets supporting cast has to show up. And it did. Grant, phenomenal. Monte Morris, couldn't miss. Paul Millsap, as hard as I've been on him, he had a clutch dunk late between the 2 Jamal Murray threes. Michael Porter was getting involved. Torrey Craig was playing good defense. Good game for the Nuggets. But can you expect this again? It took all these guys showing up to avoid squandering a 20-point lead. The fact that the Lakers were able to come back and make this close bodes really well for them. Now, I know the obvious response is going to be, well, Jacob, they went cold in the final 5 minutes. What are you talking about? Hey, I get that. They didn't play a full 48 minutes. They overlooked their opponent. When they cut it to 3, you could sense that everyone, the players, the coaches, the fans, whoever, were expecting the Lakers to take the lead and not relinquish it. It doesn't work like that. Nothing is a formality here. You're in the Western Conference Finals against a gritty Nuggets team. A team that has had their backs against the wall numerous times in the bubble. And they've been able to persevere. They may have fallen short in games 1 and 2 of this series, but after being up 20, you're only up by 3. That's backs against the wall. And they played good defense. They converted on their opportunities. Jamal Murray being great. Jokic being great. Not necessarily in the final 5 minutes, just all throughout the game. He bullied Anthony Davis. Davis only had 2 rebounds in this game. I don't think he had any rebounds outside of the fourth quarter. That is crazy. But the Lakers thought they were gonna duplicate what they did in 2000. You know that I flash back to moments in sports history when I'm watching current sports sometimes. Well, I had another one of those flashbacks. Game 7 of the 2000 Western Conference Finals. Trailblazers-Lakers. The Trailblazers are up by 15. With a little over 10 minutes left to go in the game. The Lakers go on this crazy 15-0 run to tie the game. Back and forth, back and forth. The Lakers pull away at the end, punctuated by a vicious Shaq dunk on a great pass from Kobe, and the Lakers go to the NBA Finals. In fact, they would wind up winning the NBA Finals that year. I did think the Lakers were gonna duplicate that here. That they were gonna come back. And they were gonna win. They had all the momentum. They just fell a little bit short. The duo of Kobe and Shaq is better than the duo of LeBron and AD. Alright, now it's time to preview Celtics Heat. And for the Celtics, look for them to get Gordon Hayward more involved. I understand that he played 30 minutes in Game 3, but he only took 7 shots. This is a guy who averaged almost double that in the regular season. I understand that he was coming off a big injury. He's going to have more time to heal up now that he's gotten back in the swing of things. But I still really want the Celtics to get him more involved and keep Kemba's head screwed on straight. They can't afford him having another dismal shooting night. As for the Heat, they really need to clamp down on D. In Game 3, the Celtics had 4 players score at least 20 points. That's not Heat basketball. The Heat are a very good defensive team. Jimmy Butler, great defensive player. Bam Adebayo, great defensive player. I still can't get over that block. Look for them to tighten up on D. I'd expect a lot of zone tonight. The Celtics aren't going to look to push the ball inside. They don't have anyone who can go up against Bam. Tice can't do it. Cantor can't do it. No one can do it for the Celtics. So I think the Heat are going to counter that by playing a lot of zone tonight. Look for that. Moving on now to the Stanley Cup Final. Lightning Stars tonight. Down to a best 3 out of 5. Is it too cliche to say that both teams need great performances from their goalie? I mean, it's the truth, but I guess that's not all I can say, right? I mean, really fast, Vasilevsky does not play great in Game 1, gives up 3 goals. Game 2, he only gives up 2. Anton Khudobin plays great in Game 1, only gives up 1 goal. Game 2, he goes through a stretch where he forgets how to play goalie. Both teams do need great performances from their goalie. The Lightning are probably going to look to be a little more offensive. Don't be as passive as they've been in stretches of this series. Now, the Stars play great defense, and they're going to look to keep that up. I don't think they're going to look to turn this game into a shootout. They're going to look to win this game 2-1. Maybe 3-2 at the most. But I look for the Lightning to be really aggressive in generating offensive opportunities. The Stars are going to look to counter it. They were a great defensive team in the regular season. They've kind of gotten away from that in the playoffs. I'd like for them to go back to that. This is shaping up to be a fun series. Maybe a tough series for some people to get into. 2 non-traditional hockey markets in Tampa Bay and Dallas, but Bettman likes it. He loves expanding to non-traditional hockey markets. There are some miscellaneous sports stories to go through. One from each sport. And I'll start with basketball. That story is Billy Donovan signing on to be the next head coach of the Bulls. Now, I had called for Kenny Atkinson to have gotten this job, but when Billy Donovan became available, I don't blame the Bulls for going this route at all. Look what Donovan was able to do in OKC. They made the playoffs every year he was there. This year, no one expected them to do anything. They end up as the 5th seed. This guy knows how to get through to young players. Look what he did with Shea. Look what he did with Lou Dort. Hell, look at what he did in college. The Bulls have a talented young roster. They've just done a terrible job of bringing in a coach to properly develop them. Jim Boylan is about the worst person I can think of for that responsibility. I mean, Zach LaVine is incredibly talented. Lauri Markkanen has a ton of potential. Kobe White had a good rookie season. Wendell Carter can be a perennial double-double threat. I really like this hire by the Bulls. I know a lot of their fans wanted Kenny Atkinson. They are skeptical about this. I understand that you may not have gotten your number one guy, but you know what? I can make the argument that Donovan's a better hire than Atkinson. As big an Atkinson fan as I am, Donovan has a much better track record. There's no way around it. I really think this is going to work out for the Bulls. Moving on now to hockey and Bob Boughner getting the interim tag removed from his title. He will be the Sharks' full-time head coach. And I don't get this. Boughner did not do a good job in San Jose. Doug Wilson fires Pete DeBoer, a guy who led the Vegas Golden Knights to the Western Conference Finals, and replaced him with a guy who was a failure in Florida. They never made the playoffs in his 2 years there. And this year, in 37 games, Boughner did nothing for the Sharks. 14-20-3. They were terrible. There were so many better options out there. Gerard Gallant. Make a run at Mike Babcock. How about a guy like Lane Lambert, who I'm stunned hasn't gotten head coaching consideration? Maybe a guy like Ron Wilson, Mark Crawford, Randy Carlyle. There were so many better options than Bob Boughner. Even some AHL coach that we've never heard of would have been better than this guy. Or some college coach. I don't like this move for the Sharks. I don't think it's going to pay off. And Doug Wilson deserves a ton of heat for letting Pete DeBoer go. Look at what he did in Vegas. That's not a good look for Wilson. The football story is one that had been in the works for a while, but it is official. Devontae Freeman is now a New York Giant. He signed a 1-year deal worth up to $3 million. Obviously, the Giants are without Saquon Barkley, so they will finish out the year most likely with a depth chart of Dion Lewis, Freeman, and Wayne Gallman. This move makes a ton of sense for the Giants. Freeman's a former Pro Bowler. He has 2,000-yard seasons to his name. He once led the NFL in touchdowns with 11 in 2015. The year after that, he also had 11 touchdowns. I understand that his play has slipped since then. 2017, he wasn't awful, but he wasn't great. 2018, he got hurt. And last year, he didn't have the best season. He averaged just over 3.5 yards per attempt. That's not good, but Freeman is a good pass-catching back. He had 59 catches last year for 410 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, Lewis isn't a slouch when it comes to pass catching. I think you're going to see a 1A, 1B setup with Lewis and Freeman. Lewis will probably get more opportunities, but Freeman will be there. Wayne Gallman, I think, has turned into an afterthought. This is the best that the Giants could do. We're in late September. Alright, Todd Gurley is off the board. All the hotshot young running backs have been drafted. You could do a lot worse than bringing in a former Pro Bowler. This makes a ton of sense. This is a good move for the Giants. He's not going to be able to replace Barkley, but he'll be okay. The baseball story is that according to Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic and Bill Shaken of the LA Times, Dave Dombrowski is going to succeed Billy Epler as Angels GM. Epler has not done a good job with the Angels. They've never finished with a winning record under him. I remember when he got the job, he was a very highly regarded assistant to Brian Cashman. And I thought he was going to do really good things in LA, but it hasn't worked out. He has done a terrible job putting together a good team around Mike Trout. He got Shohei Ohtani, good move, but that's pretty much it. Brad Ausmus only lasted 1 year in LA. He went 72-90. And I wasn't crazy about that move to begin with. You're replacing one of the best managers in baseball in Mike Scioscia with a guy who really wasn't great in Detroit. I never thought that was going to work. I mean, Andrelton Simmons has worked out, don't get me wrong. But Epler has done a terrible job with the rotation. Dylan Bundy has worked out. That was a really good trade. But everyone else, Julio Teheran, Matt Harvey, Trevor Cahill, Doug Fister, and Tim Lincecum, they have done nothing for the Angels. Their rotation really isn't that good. Andrew Heaney's solid, but he's not great. Griffin Canning and Jaime Barria seem like they're going to be good pitchers, but not the next John Lackey. The bullpen outside of Mike Myers really hasn't been anything special. And the Angels' window to win is now. Mike Trout isn't getting any younger. You made a big move in locking him up long term. You have to win with him. He's the best player in baseball. You don't want this guy being Ted Williams 2.0. Or Barry Bonds 2.0. You know how many playoff games Mike Trout has played in his whole career? And he's been around since 2011. 3. The 2014 ALDS, when they got swept by the Royals. I understand that Trout wasn't good in that series. He only hit .083. He only had one hit. It was a home run. But this guy is a future Hall of Famer. He's 29 years old, and I can say that with confidence. If he were to retire now, he'd have a great argument for Hall of Fame. Imagine what his career is going to look like 10 years from now. You have to win with him now. Dave Dombrowski is the perfect hire if you're trying to win now. Look what he did in Boston. He's an old school guy, which I like because I don't like sabermetrics. Artie Moreno is an owner with an old school mindset. I think the two of them will get along really, really well. It makes perfect sense to replace Epler with Dombrowski. Tomorrow, you're going to get an interview that I'm going to do with an old friend of the show, Lou Friedman. This time, it's about his book on Cy Young. You're really going to enjoy it. I love talking to Lou, really smart guy. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying, that Phil Necro's knuckler actually giggled at you as it went by you.